Why is the USS Arizona still leaking oil? I don't mean why it sank. If you know anything about Pearl Harbor, you already know that part. But the leaking, the part that's still happening right now, today, as you watch this, that's the question nobody really answers properly. On the morning of December the 7th, 1941, the USS Arizona was moored at Pearl Harbor when Japanese aircraft attacked the Pacific Fleet. A 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb came down through the forward deck and detonated the ship's ammunition magazine. The blast was so powerful, it lifted the entire battleship out of the water before she came back down and began to sink. It took 9 minutes. The Arizona has not moved since. She is still sitting on the bottom of Pearl Harbor in about 40 feet of water, exactly where she went down more than 80 years ago, and she is still leaking oil every single day. Not occasionally, not as some rare event divers stumble across. Every day, for more than 80 years, small black drops have been rising from somewhere deep inside that hull and spreading out across the surface of the harbour in a thin, rainbow-coloured sheen. People who work there call it the black tears of the Arizona. So why has nobody made it stop? The answer comes down to 3 things: a decision made the day before the attack, the condition of the hull itself, and a choice the Navy made decades ago that it has never reversed. Start with the fuel. On December 6th, 1941, the day before the attack, the Arizona was topped off with a full load of Bunker C fuel oil, a thick, heavy grade not far removed from crude. She was carrying somewhere around 1.5 million gallons. The ship was due to sail back to the mainland before the end of the month, and a battleship doesn't make a trans-Pacific crossing on an empty tank, so she was filled completely the day before. It is one of the cruelest pieces of timing in the whole story. 24 hours after that refueling, the ship that needed all that fuel for a voyage she would never take was sitting on the harbour floor with most of it still inside her. A lot of that oil burned. The fires after the explosion lasted 2.5 days, sending black smoke over 1,500 feet into the sky above the harbour. A significant amount of fuel also spilled straight out into the water as the ship went down, and for days afterward the surface of Pearl Harbor itself was on fire in places. But the Arizona's fuel bunkers sit deep in the hull, low and well protected by the ship's own structure, and a surprising number of them survived both the blast and the fire, mostly intact. When the ship finally settled on the bottom, those tanks went down with her, still sealed, still full, and they've been sitting there ever since, essentially untouched. The current estimate is that somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 gallons of oil are still trapped inside the wreck right now. At the rate it's been escaping, somewhere between 2 and 9 quarts a day, depending on whose measurements you trust, the National Park Service projects it could keep leaking for roughly another 500 years. Say that again slowly. The oil seeping out of the Arizona today isn't expected to fully stop until somewhere around the year 2500. Nobody alive will see the end of it, and neither will their grandchildren. So why not just go in and take it out? Surely with modern technology, pumping out a few 100,000 gallons of trapped oil should be a solvable engineering problem. This is where it stops being a simple question. The Navy, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Park Service have all studied this seriously since the 1990s, running surveys, sending in remotely operated vehicles, taking ultrasonic readings of the hull. And what they kept finding is that removal is far riskier than it sounds on paper. The first problem is the hull itself. 80+ years of continuous saltwater immersion has corroded the steel badly. Whole sections of the superstructure have already collapsed under their own weight, and parts of the deck have folded in on themselves. Divers and researchers survey the wreck every year, measuring metal thickness specifically inside the fuel tanks, and what they're tracking is a slow, steady thinning of the steel walls holding all that oil in. The tanks are getting weaker every year, not stronger. Any attempt to drill into them or cut through the surrounding hull to pump the oil out risks doing exactly the kind of damage nobody can take back. Instead of a controlled, careful extraction, you could trigger a sudden structural failure that dumps hundreds of thousands of gallons into Pearl Harbor, all at once. The fix could very easily be worse than the problem it's trying to solve, and once you've ruptured a tank like that, there's no putting it back together. The second issue is the oil itself, and this part genuinely surprised the researchers who first looked into it. Bunker C doesn't behave like a typical fuel spill. It's heavy, almost tar-like in consistency, and resistant to breaking down the way lighter fuels do. Scientists from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution have studied samples leaking from the wreck and found that after 8 decades underwater, the oil has barely degraded at all. Most oil spills see significant chemical breakdown within weeks of hitting open water, sunlight, and oxygen. The Arizona's oil has spent that entire time sealed inside dark, low-oxygen tanks, largely untouched by the bacteria and microbes that normally consume petroleum over time. In a strange way, it's almost the same oil that went into those bunkers in 1941. That's actually become scientifically valuable. There are roughly 5,000 World War II-era wrecks sitting on ocean floors around the world, and most of them still have fuel aboard somewhere in their hulls. What eventually happens to that oil, whether it sits quietly for centuries or eventually breaks free all at once, is a real and growing question for marine science, and the Arizona has effectively become a living laboratory for studying it, a slow-motion experiment nobody designed, but that researchers are now learning a great deal from. Then there's the third reason, and it's the one the Navy treats as completely non-negotiable. The USS Arizona is a designated war grave. More than 900 of the men aboard on the morning of December 7th, 1941, are still inside that hull, never recovered. Early on, the decision was made that they would remain with their ship, considered to be at rest at sea, rather than disturbed for recovery. In the decades since, more than 40 surviving crew members chose, after their own deaths, to have their ashes placed back inside the wreck by Navy divers so they could rest alongside the shipmates they lost that morning. A flagpole was installed on the wreck in 1950, and the American flag has been raised and lowered over it every single day since, as though the ship was still in active commission. Cutting into that hull to remove fuel means cutting into a grave that hundreds of families consider sacred ground. The Navy has been direct about this. It isn't happening, and it was never seriously on the table as an option. The oil stays because getting it out would mean disturbing the men still resting exactly where they fell. And that's a line the Navy decided long ago it will not cross, regardless of what the engineering math says. The memorial that sits above the wreck today was dedicated in 1962. It was designed by the architect Alfred Preis, a man who, in one of those details that sounds almost too fitting to be true, had himself been interned by the United States as an enemy alien after the attack, simply because of his Austrian birth. His design dips low in the centre and rises at both ends, meant to represent initial defeat giving way to ultimate victory. It straddles the hull directly without ever physically touching it, suspended above the wreck rather than resting on it. More than 2 million people visit each year, and from the open sides of the memorial, you can look straight down through the clear Hawaiian water at the ship below, the rusted shapes of gun turrets and deck fittings still visible beneath the surface. Stay long enough, and you'll see it for yourself. The slow rise of a black drop breaking the surface and spreading out into a thin sheen before it drifts away. A 2008 Department of Defense report looked specifically at the environmental risk posed by that leaking bunker fuel and found it genuinely harmful to marine life, citing long-term environmental persistence and increased exposure of toxic compounds to the surrounding ecosystem over time. Environmental groups have raised concerns about it publicly over the years, pointing out that a war memorial is also, quietly, an ongoing low-level oil spill. The Navy and the Park Service continue to monitor the wreck closely, sending divers down annually to check tank pressures and hull thickness. But there is no plan, and there has never been a plan, to intervene directly. The calculation, as cold as it sounds, is simple even though the situation isn't. A slow trickle of a few quarts a day is something the harbour's ecosystem can absorb and has been absorbing for 8 decades. A sudden catastrophic rupture caused by trying to fix it is not something anyone wants to risk. Between a manageable ongoing problem and an unmanageable potential disaster, the Navy has chosen, deliberately and repeatedly, to live with the first one indefinitely rather than gamble on the second. So that's why it's still leaking. The fuel tanks happen to survive the very explosion that destroyed the ship built around them. The hull that once held that oil safely is now too fragile and too corroded to risk opening. The oil itself has barely aged a day in 80 years, which makes it valuable to study and genuinely dangerous to disturb. And beneath all of it lies a ship that the Navy has decided will never be touched again, because touching it means touching the men still resting inside. The Arizona went into Pearl Harbor on December 6th, 1941, completely full of fuel, ready for a voyage home that never came. Instead, she's still there, still resting on the harbour floor, exactly where she sank, still releasing a few black drops at a time into water that millions of people look down into every single year. It started the morning the war began for America, and by every credible estimate available today, it won't be finished until centuries after everyone watching this video, and everyone they ever know, is gone. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, let me know in the comments, and I'll keep making them. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you then.